countless processes that have been discovered throughout human history to extend the life and quality of our food. Some are basic, like drying or cooling, and others are more sophisticated and somewhat complex, like pressure canning and fermentation. The act of preserving food has transformed the human experience, creating a stable food supply, reducing hunger, and transforming a simple food into something much more flavorful, interesting, and delicious. When we think about food preservation, it's interesting to look at where we are today and what we know, but it's also interesting to look back and see how this practice was utilized throughout human history. It's also fun to see how this process is harnessed by so many food businesses, many that are in our Fargo-Moorhead food community, to produce delicious, unique, safe, and shelf-stable foods. So that's what leads us into introducing our awesome speakers today, who will touch on all these topics and more. So would you please join me in welcoming Markus Krueger from the Historical and Cultural Society of Clay County, Rita Ussatis from the NDSU Extension, Cass County, and Kevin Struxness from the Hippie Pickling Company.
Okay. There we go. Okay, well, I'm going to talk about war gardens. We all know about the World War II Liberty Gardens, but the idea actually comes from World War I, Liberty Gardens, Victory Gardens and Liberty Gardens. How can a garden help win a war? It seems like the least violent thing I can think of. Well, the idea is you grow more food at home, so our farmers can send more of our food to our soldiers, and not just our soldiers. You know, we're feeding our Russian allies, we're feeding England, we're feeding China, and as we're, you know, when we liberate the Philippines, when we liberate France, our farmers are feeding them too. So grow more food at home. And this is important. This is one thing that everybody can do to help with the war effort. Not all of us are the right age or the right gender to join the Marine Corps, but we can all raise a garden. The idea starts in World War I. This guy, Charles Lathrop Pack, he came up with the idea of, well, I'll let him say. The sole aim of the National War Garden Commission was to arouse the patriots of America to the importance of putting all idle land to work, to teach them how to do it, and to educate them to conserve by canning and drying all food they could not use while fresh. The idea of the city farmer came into being. I'm so glad we're here with Extension. The Extension is the heroes of the home front in both wars. Extension was brand new in World War I, just a couple years old. And our Clay County Extension agent helped 300 people in Clay County start a garden, taught 500 women how to can. Those 500 women canned 10,000 quarts of food and dried 5 tons of vegetables. Nationally, 1.45 billion quarts of food were canned in 1918. Did that help the war effort? Absolutely. So when we start a new war, a next generation in World War II, we need that magic again. And we call them victory gardens this time. The government asked for 18 million of them. We gave them 20 million. And it's estimated that 1 in 3 vegetables grown in America in 1943 was grown in someone's home or community victory garden. Can more in 44 was Extension's motto in 1944. These are staggering numbers. Clay County Extension assisted 2,860 families in food preservation in 1944. That's 1 in 9 people in this county took a class from Extension. And that's pretty good numbers, right? Yeah. And those 2,860 families produced, I mean, I'm not even going to read the numbers, 500,000 quarts of fruits and veggies, 62,000 gallons of brine veggies, half a million pounds of dried fruits and veggies. It comes out to 29 quarts and 21 pounds dried for every man, woman, and child in Clay County. That's a lot. In 1944, Clay County Extension agents taught 876 people how to use pressure canners. These are the ladies of Oakport Township here in North Moorhead. Somebody mentioned Verna Cragness' name, her aunt's in this picture. Not all of us have farm land. So those of us who live in apartments or in small lots in town, community gardens. And these war gardens were incredibly important to the history of American community gardens. These are community garden ads for Moorhead and Barnesville in World War II. The Moorhead's community garden plot, Victory Garden plot, was on the 600 block of 11th Street North. We did it in World War I as well. The places outlined in red are World War I Liberty Gardens, community gardens. And if you can't grow it, you should still can it. The government encouraged people to buy more from truck farmers. Truck farmers were vegetable farmers. They're the people we now see at farmers markets. Back then we called them truck farmers. That's vegetable stand is the Old Trail Market at Propseal Farm. Charles Peterson was a truck farmer. He said, "Remember our self-service Victory Garden plan. We have planted hundreds of Victory Gardens. You are invited to pick the crop." And I'm just going to end with my favorite gardening quote ever. It ran in the Holly Herald 4 days before Adolf Hitler killed himself in the bunker below Berlin. They wrote, "It is surprising how many people never realize what fun there is in working the soil, what pride one takes in the vegetables one produces, until the war made these gardens necessary. Now, the growing of vegetables not only serves the purposes of aiding the war effort, but it gives many men and women a pleasant, healthful hobby. Add to the fact that there is nothing more appetizing than crisp, fresh vegetables taken from one's own garden, and you have plenty of reasons why victory gardening is not likely to want to any extent when the war is over." Now I'm going to pass this off to Rita.
Thank you. Well, I'm Rita Ussatis, Extension Agent in Cass County, and I'm going to do some food preservation facts or myths. So I'm going to have you guys do a little audience participation. Our goal is to display the myths about food preservation, to provide information about the current food preservation methods out there that are a little different than 1909, and then have a little fun in the process. So first of all, fact or myth, old church books or your grandma's cookbooks have great canning recipes you'll want to use. Yeah. I'm glad I heard a little myth. Old church book cookbooks or your grandma's cookbooks provide outdated and unsafe, very unsafe canning methods. Hear that? Very unsafe. So, like Marcus said, we kind of go up in these peaks and valleys. And so in the late 80s, early 90s, food preservation was hot, was really hot. And then it's kind of died off. And now in the last about 6 years, it's coming really hot again. And I think that's because you guys want to know where your food's coming from and preserve your own food. Well, the research actually began in the 1940s with the USDA, and that's the United States Department of Agriculture. The first publication that was ever written was in 1909. That was before Extension. We've had many visits on our research in 1994 and lately after 2006. So if you have any of your information in your house, like a Ball Blue book or Extension publications, and they have anything before 2006, throw them away or donate them to the museum. So only use recipes from USDA, Extension, or Ball. And you don't have to use NDSU Extension. We would like that because that's formulated for our area. But you can go on any website and do research-based canning recipes. So you might get something from Alaska or Georgia, or Ball Blue Book is another one. If you see in the picture, it says so easy to preserve. That's all the recipes from like all across the nation from the University of Georgia. And so when people call me with a weird food, that's the book I go to. So, fact or myth, as long as you boil the jars of vegetables long enough, you have a safe product.
Yes.
You know, that's funny because I just got that call from somebody. Wondering if they could boil it and redo everything. Here's a little bit about botulism. 1 milligram of pure botulism toxin can kill 655 tons of mice. Now, I don't know what that equates to, but 655 tons. What's that? That's a lot. Food can contain botulism. It would have no signs or smells or taste to it. There's an antioxidant available if you catch it soon enough, but you might have some permanent nerve damage. Well, why do you really care? Well, it happened in North Dakota, and I know it was in 1931, and that was a long, long time ago. But it was in a county where I actually served for about 9 years, and so it was very popular up in Grafton. 9 or 12 people died from eating pasta salad with peas that weren't processed right. How would you like to have that in your family reunion? Well, you say that's 1931, who really cares? Well, you know what? It happened in 2017 in Ohio at a potluck at a church. 1 person died, 18 people got sick, 21 people were also monitored. They traced it back to a potato salad that was made with potatoes that weren't processed right. They weren't pressure canned, they were just hot water bath. How would you like to have that? That's why I don't eat at potlucks. Any of my coworkers or friends know that. I don't eat at potlucks, or I don't eat where I don't know where the food comes from. Well, we don't want you to be afraid. Safe food preservation is, at home, it's very possible. Vegetables, meats, and most mixtures of food should only be canned in a pressure canner.
Fact.
It's a fact. We actually look at the acidity of the food to determine how we can can it. So any food that has a low pH, that's low 4.6 or lower, has to be pressure canned. That's like vegetables, except when you acidify them. Meats, poultry, seafood, soups, and mixtures of low acid foods. Don't confuse a pressure canner and a pressure cooker. This is one of my favorite calls I get every year in the office. You have to have a pressure cooker, and it has to be big enough to hold 4 quarts size jars. The new really popular pressure cookers, saucepans, they have a lower volume and they're not recommended for canning. The other one I get a lot of, because there's an electric pressure canner out there right now, we still don't recommend that. There's not enough research out there to support that. We can say, yep, it's safe. Canning in your oven is safe, convenient way to seal jars. This is the latest internet craze. Actually, the latest internet craze is the dishwasher. So canning in the oven is not safe. I got to tell a gentleman that he had to throw 275 quarts of food away because he canned them in his oven. He said, Rita, do you know how long that took me to do? I said, yep. I said, do you want to kill off your wife or your children, your friends? The methods are extremely dangerous for low acid foods. Don't use any other appliances either. We've had some that are trying microwave cooking. And again, right now the dishwasher is the really popular one. Another factor myth, you can invent your own salsa recipe as long as you process it in a water bath canner. Myth. That's a myth. You can prevent your own recipe, but you just have to freeze it. I see I'm out of time. You need to follow the formulas exactly, measure and weigh ingredients carefully. And so, we'll just go right on. So enjoy food preservation. Make sure you use up-to-date current recipes. If you have questions, call your local extension agent. Kevin.
Thanks, Rita. Did anyone else feel like she was looking at me when she was talking?
I haven't tried this pickle.
I don't know. I'm Kevin Struxness with Hippie Pickling Company, and where'd it go? There we go. So it all started really young. My grandma, my mom, my aunts, they all taught us at an early age to not ever waste food, right? So how Hippie Pickling Company came to be, though, was I was at a barbecue, brought a dozen jars of pickles with, and they were gone in maybe 20 minutes. And everybody said, we need more of these, we need more of these. And I just happened to have a few hundred sitting at home. The year before, I had maybe 12 cucumber plants, and they just kept producing and producing. So you think to yourself, it's like, what am I going to do with all this? So Hippie Pickling was born, and now we have, I think, 16 recipes. I can't remember. there's a bread and butter out there. I don't like bread and butter pickles whatsoever, so we try to specialize in canning food that we grew ourselves. Now, this past year we've gone out to some farmers. I see a couple in here that I've purchased produce from. So now we can claim that everything in our jars has been grown locally, which is important to us. And you know, the people that we sell to, it's important to them as well to know where their food is coming from. And we took our grandma's recipe and basically made it into something that's safe in 2019. So a lot of the flavors are going to be the same, the produce is the same, but now we're not going to die of botulism, which is, I think, the main goal. We knew we were great at making pickles. What we didn't know is that we were great at growing weeds. We ramped up our area to like 2.5 acres, and as you can see behind my son here, that's all weeds. There are, you know, there's some produce hidden here and there, and I think with starting any business, you're gonna have some hiccups along the way, and you're gonna learn and grow from it. We were still able to can over 2,000 jars that summer, on top of asking anybody and everybody if they like to pull weeds. I've got a spot for you. So these cucumbers are you can see a lot of different sizes, right? If you go to Gedney or Clausen, it's all going to be the same. Everyone is you know, 4 inches, 4.5 inches, perfect height, width. We're not interested in that. We like the imperfection of at-home canning. And you can see, you know, there's one that you might have to cut in half. There's one that you might just throw in there after you take the flour off. And in the long run, it doesn't matter to us as long as the flavor is there in the end. Because if it's small, large, medium, sliced, cubed, whatever, doesn't matter. So we follow, this is our house. We can everything in our house. Now we follow all the Minnesota cottage law stuff, and so essentially it's, you know, wearing gloves and wearing a hairnet and making sure everything is sterilized. And it's really interesting how those rules change from year to year, but in the long run, you know, you just put a label on, made in an at-home kitchen, and as long as you're following some certain guidelines, you're going to be okay. So I'm going to stop there. Please enjoy pickles.
I'll take the clicker. Thank you. All right, thank you guys all for those wonderful presentations. We got a kind of a really nice mix of information around the topic, so that was super fun. So now is the time where we get to ask some questions, but I have one that I need to ask before I advance the slide. Tell us about your logo. What is going on there? I see sandals with socks, and there's a lot of detail in that. So can you give us a little overview of what's going on with that guy?
How do I say it? I'm not as polished that like maybe 10 years ago as I am now. I used to have dreadlocks down to here and a beard down to here, and I guess I just
So it's you.
yeah. That's me 10 years ago that you would never want to run into.
You as a pickle 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's where it came from.
Okay, awesome. All right, so now let's move on to questions more broadly beyond the logo. Anything you want to know or ask about food preservation? Jen?
What varieties of cucumbers do you find work the best?
We're still working on that. I would say we used one called Boston Snow, but we found that you really had to be out there twice a day, because they tend to, sometimes they grow an inch a day, sometimes they grow 2 inches a day. So, you know, if you were gone for the weekend and didn't tend to the garden, you would come back and they'd be giant footballs almost. You know? It's like, so it's a combination of that, Boston pickling, and then we used one from Johnny's seeds as well this year that was really well. So I think we did 4 different varieties this year.
Rita, do you have anything to
I
add?
do. That's one of my other calls I get is their pickles aren't crisp like they want. So I ask them what variety they planted, and they don't know. And most of them plant a slicing variety, one that's just for eating. So if you're going to make pickles, make sure you buy a pickle variety to pickle.
Perfect. Other questions that the audience has? Deb?
So when we are supposed to use pressure cookers, one of the problems with glass top ovens is that sometimes that can wear out your elements if you pressure cook on there for a long time. So what do you suggest? Getting an induction burner or?
So that's not the same for pressure cookers or for your, I have over here, I have a table. There's a big blue canner there. You can't actually use that on a stovetop that's glass either. And it's not because it's not as safe, you'll probably crack your stovetop.
Right.
So if you look up to the farther over, I have a nice silver stock pot with a wire rack there. And you need to buy a pot that's the same size as your largest ring on your stovetop. And use that for canning. This is for water bathing because you don't want to crack your stovetop. You can use it whatever method you want to do for your pressure canner as long as you have even heat. So if it can stay as an even heat, sometimes hot plates don't stay even. So as long as you can have a source of heat that's even heat, you can use whatever for your pressure canner.
How about the little induction burners?
Do they stay even? I don't know if they stay even heat.
Even heat.
Even heat. It has to be even.
Yes. So as you guys were talking, I think it's interesting to think about, you know, Rita shared a lot of information about the science and safety and how do we make sure that what we're producing is safe. And then Kevin, kind of what you talked about is like exploring all these different flavors and creating 16 different unique pickle products. So how do you find that balance between, you know, following the science and make sure that you're producing a safe product, but also having culinary curiosity and discovering new things? So I'm not sure if either of you want to...
I can start. You can try whatever you want. The safe alternative is always just to refrigerate it as you're trying to master your recipe. And then you can always have your product tested for acidity. We can do that at Extension office or at NDSU and test the pH. So as you go through that, there's methods to invent your own recipes. You just have to follow a few processes.
Ditto.
Markus, as you were kind of going through some of the historical things, I was just like, this is so great, what was happening 100 years ago. Do you have some other examples of unique times in history where food preservation has been utilized in unique or interesting ways? I know that the Victory Gardens is kind of like the flagship example of unique times, but anything else that kind of stands out to you?
Well, it wasn't good in the Civil War. You read accounts about the soldiers opening up their cans and it's just maggoty food. I think that so World War II, it was really Russia that defeated the Nazis, but they were doing it in American trucks with Spam, you know. So we did give. I don't want to downplay America's role in World War II, of course, because I think you know we wouldn't have won the war without us. But I think something like 8 out of 10 Russians who died in World War II died, or 8 out of 10 Germans who died in World War II died in Russia. Yeah, the amount of food that we sent over to Russia and to England was really indispensable. One thing I thought was interesting about buying from truck farmers, fresh. There were a lot of food that was rationed in World War II, but fresh fruits and vegetables were never rationed. You can buy as much of those as you want, and you're encouraged to buy extra and can your own because the fruit wasn't rationed, but the aluminum can around the fruit was rationed. They want that to turn into a bomber. So you're encouraged to can your own with glass, you know, glass jars. Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Yeah, Jen.
This is for Marcus. You talk about like World War I, World War II, the victory gardens, you know, really pushing for that, which is awesome. And nowadays, with especially the local foods movement, you see a lot more people getting into that. And maybe you have more numbers. I mean, is it even close to what it was like back then? And if not, what would it take for our community to really give that push? And maybe, you know, do you ever see the government stepping in, or probably not, but ever pushing to that point again where we can be more self-sufficient and really pushing on that canning, or maybe we're past that?
I am so glad you figured out a way to ask that question, because I was like, how does one ask that? But you just perfectly. Thank you, Jen.
Yeah, I've been trying to think about that too lately. We have had wars since World War II, and I guess we feel like we have this industrial food system that, sometimes we don't like how industrial our food system is, but these farmers can grow a lot of food. These food companies can can a lot of food in ways that doesn't give us botulism, and they, maybe they can do it better than we can at home. I love home gardening. I'm a gardener. I used to former president of Profield Farm, so I'm big into agriculture. But we didn't seem to feel like we needed it to fight Iraq. I don't know. We didn't. There was a recent Nazi resurgence, so that didn't get us gardening again.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's a small resurgence because everyone wants to know where their food's coming from now and what's in their food. But our population is a lot bigger as well. And we don't all grow up with your own garden and your own livestock on your farms. So I think just keep spreading the word to, grow your own gardens, or go visit Jack's gardens when he's selling produce off, and learn how to preserve your food at home, and just start making that a tradition again. Because it went through this valley where, your mothers probably didn't do that, but now you want to do that again. So I think it's just getting everyone involved, and I don't think we'll ever be to the massive numbers like that, but just keep spreading the word.
And I learned all this stuff from reading the county extension books that are in our archives. So that's probably a Rita question. How many? Are there a lot of people gardening and canning right now?
Yeah, more than 10 years ago.
Yeah, definitely a resurgence, and interesting to think about, is it going, what is motivating that? It's a lot of values and personal beliefs and wanting to connect more closely to food, but there really isn't a strong survival or national security movement around it.
In 2000, when the world was going to end, there was a real resurgence in the year in 1999. There was a real resurgence because my phone was never so busy as then.
Did anyone else listen on NPR this week with Halloween? They had some zombie apocalypse stuff, and then they were kind of talking about if the apocalypse I don't know, it just kind of got you down the train of thought of thinking about emergency preparedness. So, yeah, Don.
Along with Marcus and your comments and what we were just talking about, I recall my grandparents talking about their victory gardens in both World War I and World War II, and there was such a feeling of that they were doing something to support the effort. So, even in their old age, they were telling us kids about the victory gardens. But anyway, the thing that I am very encouraged about now is I feel a resurgence of that. Not to those levels yet, but one of the things that has greatly increased is the raised gardening, the square foot gardening that has allowed people in a small yard and to grow, good quantities of vegetables. Also patio gardening, balcony gardening. So I'm seeing a definite increasing interest again in it, which is very encouraging to me.
Absolutely. Other questions? Yeah, Mara.
I just have a comment and then a question. When my daughter was in South Korea teaching, heavy, dense population, a lot of them did garden on their roofs, and a lot of them in the center of the city, kimchi was really a major thing that they would preserve and eat. So, but But my grandmother used to talk, or my mom used to talk about my grandma having this victory garden. And, but she talked about how they got really tired eating lima beans because I'm not sure if you heard about the deal with lima beans, but packaged beans versus buying the can, maybe.
I know nothing about that. But
I guess one thing I think is interesting that the Liberty Gardens, researching Liberty Gardens and Victory Gardens taught me is that it's like just because our families lived in olden times doesn't mean that they were always, shearing sheep and making Christmas sweaters out of them, or one of the, 876 women, for 876 families in Clay County, if your grandma canned using a pressure canner, it's because they learned how to do it in 1944 from County Extension, and they didn't know how to do it before. Gardening, you can see these statistics, and gardening in 1916 was not as common as it was in 1918. Gardening in 1939 was not as popular as it was in 1945, and then it dipped down again in 1951. So we are people that eat like a lot. We've always eaten a lot of packaged foods or once those were made available,
thinking about the process of canning food, was that discovered in the United States, and was it like commissioned by the U.S. government to figure out this way to process food so that people, for wartime efforts, or was it something that people were doing and then they saw this method that people were preserving food and then decided to, this works, let's take it, let's disseminate this information out to the masses?
He's gonna Google.
Okay, is that what's happening? Are you Googling?
Yeah, so Marcus is Googling.
We have not had a person Google on stage the answer before, so that's fun.
I'm just checking what I think.
Okay.
When cooperative extension started in 1914, one of the first things they did was corn clubs, and with youth to teach their fathers how to farm, and they started canning clubs. And so in 1814 is when the USDA started teaching canning clubs for homes as part of extension to preserve foods. So that's the history with extension. That's when it started.
Okay. Marcus, what does Google say?
Okay, so this is something that I thought I read somewhere else, and it's confirmed by Wikipedia. The process of canning was developed during the Napoleonic Wars. It's a French development. And Napoleon wanted a way to safely feed his armies, and so he offered a big cash reward to anybody who could come up with a way of doing it. So I guess we could add another. We got another war to this slide.
When you do version 2.0 of this presentation, you can add the Napoleonic Wars. Kevin, can you talk a little bit? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I have a very different kind of question for kind of Rita and Kevin. So this year was the first year I've done a garden, had a ton of tomatoes come August, September. For real successful canning, do you really need to plan that before planting, in March, April, May? Is that?
Yeah, so for myself personally, when we're planting our at-home garden, it pretty much starts around like January, and I'll start seeds in March, and then we're gonna try to use our best guess on how much that will produce, so we know how many cans we need to buy. For Hippie Pickling, we're talking buying cans by the truckload. So I mean, planning probably started yesterday, or should have. Hopefully I get a couple weeks off before we start planning. But yeah, I mean, you really need to try to do some fact-based research on how many pounds of tomatoes you're gonna get off of this variety, and then go from there.
That's what I was going to say. You want to make sure you have enough produce that's ready at the same time, but you don't want your whole garden ready at the same time. If you don't want to can for 4 days in a row or something like that. So that's what planting it at different times, or even some different varieties, like different growing seasons.
Awesome. Yeah, Jen.
One piece of preservation that we haven't really talked about yet is drying and fermenting. Because I know we've been talking about candy. Do you guys have a lot of experience, or what are your thoughts on some of the drying process and fermenting process?
Does anyone here dry or ferment?
The only thing we dry are Thai chili peppers, which are extremely easy to dry, which is why we chose that pepper. You just hang it and let it do its thing. For fermenting, we do sauerkraut probably every 2 years. It's really finding the right temperature, finding the right humidity, getting a good crock to do it in, and then really just checking it every few days to make sure that it's going. We've messed around with fermenting cucumbers, but I'm personally not a fan of that process. So yeah, that's
So all of your pickles are non-fermented pickles?
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
If you want to learn more, go to the Extension website. We have a whole section on fermenting, and we don't have much on drying. We got just a real little bit on drying.
I will say the extension is a great, I mean, that's like the first place I ever go to if I've got questions is the extension office. So anybody hasn't visited that, yeah, do it. It's awesome.
Nice.
So a lot of the talks I do are like on alcohol history because at Junkyard Brewing Company at History on Tap, first Monday of the month at 6 o'clock, and so
Just slightly
yeah.
casually putting that out there.
That's an interesting thing about prohibition is okay. When we used to have apples ferment naturally. Apple juice ferments naturally. If you have an apple tree in your yard, you know you can't eat all those apples, right? So in 1919, 1920, when we're enacting prohibition, this was still an era when poor people starved. And so farmers would all have apple trees in their yard, and it's not for making a lot of pies, it's for its calories. And so there was a loophole in prohibition where farm wines were legal as long as you made them on your own land and did not transport them off your land, and as long as you did not sell them. Yeah, if anybody's got an old apple press in their yard, or grandma and great-great-grandma and grandpa used to have an old cider press, that's not for making apple juice. It's apple juice for the first 3 days, but.
So are you making farm wine on at your personal property and not transporting or selling that?
Yeah. At the Comstock House, we got some apple trees, and we take some of those, and me and some friends make some cider every year.
Nice. Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about, you're a cottage food product and you're doing all of this in your home, correct?
Yeah.
So where are you able to sell your product out into the community through like cottage food laws and that type of stuff?
So Minnesota, North Dakota has reciprocity with cottage food laws, so we're able to do markets, and there are some stores that you can sell in as well, but the key to it all is just having that label where it's made in an at-home kitchen environment. And with the current law in Minnesota, that's all you really need.
So where can folks buy your pickles?
We took this year off for the most part, but if you look at our Facebook page, I can meet you or anybody else anywhere in town.
Shady backdoor.
Yeah, I mean, we've got, our website is under construction again, but yeah, you're always welcome to message me, call me. We've got quite the inventory, so.
It is interesting with this whole, when you were talking about finding the right crock for fermentation, my sister is a big sauerkraut maker, and she found a crock that she wanted on Craigslist, and we met a guy in an alley, and it was just a very weird, so it's a lot of, it's just fun, the personal element that kind of goes along with this whole world of local food preservation.
Did he look like my label?
He had a treasure trove of stuff in that van. Other questions? Yeah, Simone.
I was wondering for Kevin, what are your favorite pickles to make, and then what are customers' favorite types of pickles, recipes?
Yeah, thank you. I would say our best seller is the garlic dill, just because people around here are very familiar with it.
Collective.
Yeah, it's very garlicky. My favorite personally is the ghost pepper dill. Through the canning process, it actually kind of diminishes the heat just enough to where you can still enjoy it without killing yourself. So it's 30 minutes of hot, but it just goes away like that. Whereas if you have some salsa with that, you might feel it for much longer. So that's my favorite one.
Nice. Other questions? Yeah.
I should caution everyone that making pickles and sauerkraut in an old crock, one should be very careful with lead glaze.
What was the thing to be careful of in old crocks?
Lead glaze.
Lead, yes.
Acid can really do a number on lead glaze
Okay.
and into the food.
Good comment. Thank you. Joe.
Curious, Marcus, as well as for the others, media played an important role, I think, in getting people excited to be gardening. I mean, a lot of those were government paid ads, so curious from a historical standpoint, sort of the research on that, and then have you been inspired by any canning advertising over the years, or thinking about, how do we start a revolution?
Actually, yeah. Okay, so in 2014, I think maybe worked with some people in the room, but on trying to get more people to with the Dakota Medical Foundation, trying to get more people to garden, and so we used those great in 1944 Victory Garden ads, and we kind of updated them a little bit too for modern times. And it's not, and people are doing that all around the place. World War II is a really great. It's a time when the whole country got together in a way that we wish we still could. Well, I guess not the whole country. I mean, we were putting Japanese Americans in internment camps. We should remember that. But it was a time when we had a common goal, and we were generally, we're taking the bumpers off our cars so we could recycle them. And so we wish that we could get together like that again. And there was a lot of government. There was a lot of government push with ads. You can read in the local newspapers. It says, there's ads about victory gardening, and so there was some appeals to patriotism. Local companies tried to get on that bandwagon too, like Norby's department store. It's a local department store saying we got victory garden clothes for our victory gardeners. I guess if our country feels that it's important and we can appeal to the greater good, then maybe we can get more people gardening.
Very interesting question. Rita or Kevin, do you have any comments on that?
It's kind of embarrassing, but Food Network. Yeah, I mean, it's I find that a lot of them do a quick pickle, especially on shows like Chopped or, what have you. They take food items I wouldn't even think about trying to pickle, and so then I'll try it at home. So some of that stuff we end up hoarding for ourselves, like pickled eggs and asparagus during the spring and stuff like that too. So I found that at some point someone has probably tried to pickle almost anything or everything. So we just try to do the best research that we can before we do it.
I think it's interesting right now that gardening and food preservation and kind of this whole aura of activity around local food, it definitely has a cool factor to it. It's hip and it's fun to do, but there's a lot of work that goes along with it too. So making that leap from being an avid lover of the practice to being a person that is actively out and doing it, there's definitely a barrier between the two.
I just want to mention that as we're doing this, to make sure you are using a research-based YouTube or Pinterest site, because there's lots out there that aren't. Doesn't matter where you live in the United States, there's an extension service. So if you have family and friends in other states, have them talk to their extension service or Google their extension service, because just make sure you're using stuff that's gonna be safe for you.
What's the craziest question you've ever had?
I don't know, I get lots of them.
For those who don't know, extension agents get calls into the office, and a lot at this, well, in the last couple of months, I'm sure a lot were food preservation
Yeah,
related.
well, it's either mine or Dawn's, my horticulturalist, apple, and right now it's kind of some apple questions, what to do with apples, but it kind of goes with the time. I don't really know what the weirdest one is. I get a lot of homemade invented recipes, especially for salsa, and they want to know if I can tell them if it's safe. Which because they want to sell it, and I can't tell them if it's safe if they made their own homemade little invention. But we get lots of calls. You know, we do classes, and I'm happy to do classes. What I find is people don't want to come because it's like a 4-hour class. Because by the time you prepare your food and process it, it takes 4 hours, and they say it takes 4 hours. It's like, yeah, it's not a 30-minute process here, so.
So we are out of time for our questions, but thank you all for the wonderful discussion today and for your great answers. But we do always end each First Friday with a final question, and it's what can we do to support you? What can we do to share the message about what you're doing or the products that you're selling or the information that you want people to walk away with today?
If you want to know more about World War I and Liberty Gardens and all that, we have an exhibit about World War I and Spanish influenza at the Youngcom Center right now. And actually, I want to, for the foodies in the audience, the best time to come see the Youngcoms is November 16. That's Pangea, that's our multicultural festival. It's free, 10 to 4. We have 10 different food vendors from around the world, but from this town. We have 2 stages of music and dancing. We have vendors. It's free, and it's the funnest, most heartwarming day of the year.
I kind of summed it up earlier, but do preserve your own food. Just make sure you're using a safe method to do it, and then enjoy it. Don't be afraid of it.
I don't know if this is the right crowd to tell this to, because I'm sure you all do it, but I would say just eat local. Support your local farmers, your local producers, and just kind of have an appreciation for all the work that they do instead of going to the grocery store and seeing that, bell peppers are, 2 for $5 right now or whatever it is. You could have bought that in August from your local farmer and then preserved it yourself. But yeah, that's all I would say.
Awesome. Would you all please join me in giving a round of applause to these speakers?